going back to almost the beginning, I was about 3.5 years old when I discovered that if I crept into the corner of my father's studio and didn't say anything, he would let me stay there for hours on end, watching him painting his English landscapes. And as I got a bit older, so I actually joined him on expeditions around the English countryside. Countryside which is now the London airport, rich, fertile land, and beautiful villages, and he immortalized these. And many people in places like Canada bought them because they reminded them of England. So I had an introduction to art, which was simply a family thing, and I had attached no great significance to it. And I went to junior school in the same state of mind. And one Friday, the headmaster's secretary came into the classroom and said, "Brian is to go and see the headmaster." And I immediately thought that my attempts to blow up the school had been discovered. And wondering what on earth it was. I'm sure the rest of the class were wondering as well. He's going to see the headmaster. When I got to the headmaster, he said, "Oh, sit down, Brian." He said, "I've been watching your progress in art, and I think you have got quite an ability, and I want to encourage it. Over here," and he pointed to this lovely stack of thick white cartridge paper. He said, "I want you to come here every Friday afternoon and take away with you one sheet of this lovely cartridge paper and bring it back on Monday morning with drawings or paintings, whichever you want, and we will build up a file of all your work." And that was the first time I ever focused on art and me. It was most out of the blue. And there came another moment of that sort. By the time I'd gone through junior school and managed to get myself a place in the local grammar school, I was a relatively quiet member of the school. I didn't get into trouble, but you could say I had a low profile. I took to art and all the other subjects very happily. I do remember the art teacher was particularly excited by my work, but it was all, as far as I was concerned, low key. And then one morning assembly, I was sitting quite innocently with all the rest, waiting for the headmaster's announcements. We'd had prayers, we'd sung, we waited for the announcements. And he said, "I'm very pleased to announce that Brian Tilbrook of 2C has won the first, second and third prize of the council's local book market design bookmark for use in public libraries around the area." And he said, "And 2 of them are going to be published, the first and the third, and the school will be acknowledged in the process." So that was another sort of jump in my rather feeble self-evaluation. And I found that art was beginning to be something I was associated with. And the more that happened, the more I delved into it, the more I did, the more I enjoyed it, the more it made sense that it was the thing I was most concerned about. There was one other moment in that period of my life, by which time I'd become a fourth former, when I was asked to design this backdrop for the Shakespeare Twelfth Night. And this, of course, was the first real chance I had to get involved in what has now become in Hong Kong part of my reason for being here. You know, I have designed more stage sets than anyone else in the whole of Hong Kong. No one would ever catch me. The last time we did a count up, over 100 stage sets. Not that numbers are significant, but I love designing for the theatre. And this was my first opportunity, 12th night. Wasn't totally a success. Malvolio came through the door and the door followed. But come the final act, this big front drop of a garden at night with the moon and everything, the audience all cheered, which made me feel good. I should explain that we didn't have a lot of money, typical school. I painted the front drop, this lovely scene, on bus indication blinds made of canvas and paper, the things that they roll down to tell people it's in 98 going to Ruislip, sort of thing. And that was the material. And of course it looked absolutely convincing until the caretaker, as night began to fall, switched on the outside lights. And then down the sky came in quite clear words, to hire a bus, to hire a bus, to hire a bus, to hire a bus. And the audience just cracked up. It was the funniest moment in the play. But in its funny sort of way, it rebounded very happily on me. I wasn't a great sportsman, but I remember even the head of the sports department, who had largely remained aloof, came up and gave me a very warm shake of the hands, and you know, even to hire a bus had gone down quite well. So that was a happy time. From there, a plot between the headmaster, my father, and my art teacher was hatched, which meant me leaving just when I was doing the upper levels of exams. I was whisked away so that I could make a clean start in the local art college, because the three of them had decided that art was what had to be my life. And you know, the way you are, you just let these things happen. I don't think we even talked about it very much. We did afterwards, after fait accompli. We had a good old chat about what art could lead to. I found, in all honesty, the work I did at home was much better than the work I did in the art college. It was fun socially, the art college, but it was full of, I felt, people who were past their artistic prime and were fixed in their ways. And if I tried to do anything slightly unusual, if I took any sort of special angle on something, it was sort of slapped down a bit. Anyway, I took all my exams, I got my degree, and at the end of that time, the dreaded business of going into national service, which had been held off for 2 years to complete all the exams. The army were very good in that way. But once I had qualified, then they said, in you go. And I was with 9 other friends. They went in, I can't remember the exact date, but it was sometime in July. And I was held back for 2 weeks because in our last game of cricket, I had tried to catch a ball, and this finger was pointing in the wrong direction. I dropped the ball as well. It's even worse. And that delayed me for a fortnight. my 9 friends variously were posted to the glories of Aldershot, a military town, or even worse, Catterick, a military town deep in the country, lost to civilization. I went to Japan, all by myself. I went to Japan. I couldn't believe my good fortune. And I shouldn't even have gone to Japan. I was supposed to go to Korea as part of the peace force. The war between South Korea and North Korea had just finished. Still no peace agreement to this very day. And the troop ship in front of ours got stuck in Busan Harbor. And we were diverted to Japan, to Yokohama. And I was hoiked off the boat and posted to a job in Kure. Kure was about 15 minutes from Hiroshima. And it should have been the target for the atom bomb. It had submarine pens, it had troops, it had everything that was military. Hiroshima was simply a peaceful city with 1 million people going about their everyday work. But the instruction was, if there's cloud over Kure, you fly on and drop your bomb on Hiroshima. And one of the paintings which I've put into this exhibition is very much caught up with the bomb, the awfulness of it, and the fact that it's part of a tradition that goes back centuries of people wanting to kill people by the thousand. And I fell in love with Hiroshima because at weekends it was my escape from all the work I was doing, which I'll talk about in a moment. But first of all, there was the joy of the Hiroshima weekend. Sunday was spent in a coffee shop called the Mushka, and it basically had this stunning equipment that the Japanese produced for the performance of music. And you went in and you ordered coffee, cake, and Wagner's Ring Cycle. And if you waited long enough, you got somebody else's symphony, 2 concertos and half an opera, and then up came your music. You spent the whole day there with friends, just drinking coffee, eating cakes. And it was a very special place to me. And I do remember that when my national service was over and I was being returned to England, I did one of these sort of yucky General MacArthur type things. I will return. I ordered Dvorak's New World Symphony, coffee and cake, and I listened to the first 2 movements. And at the end of them, I said goodbye to this very good friend as he'd become. And I said to him, I shall come back. I shall come back and I shall ask to hear the remaining 2 movements of the Dvorak New World Symphony. The work which I did in Kure read in a way which people, particularly military people, couldn't believe. I spent my whole year designing stage sets, organizing an art club, building a cinema, which they named after me, to provide entertainment for the soldiers in the evening time. I organized all the visual work to do with the Church of England's activities in that part of Japan. I designed a magazine, wrote film grids. I worked like the clappers. I was up at 6 in the morning and I was working until about 10 o'clock at night. Most of the time I didn't wear a uniform. All my fellow national servicemen were doing other things to do with military affairs. I was the oddball out again, yet again because of art. There was a funny moment which I always think sums up the army. The army has regulations for everything, even painting the coal white. But if they want something, they will twist all the way round to get what they want. They're not the slightest bit concerned. And I had an example of this. I decided I would walk into Curie from the camp. And it was raining. And this is one of the few times when I put my uniform on. So it made very good sense to me that I had an umbrella. Of course, in the army, you're not allowed to walk anywhere in uniform with an umbrella. But I walked all the way towards Curie, and coming the other way was about as high-powered a general as you could get. I mean, he was all red braid and crowns and things. I don't think he was our final boss. I think he was probably the second in command. But he stopped, and in a sort of almost apoplectic term, he said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Tilbrook, sir." "Oh, yes. Well, good day to you." And he was gone. And I thought, how odd. He was about to tell me off. He was about to strip me down. When I got back, it was explained to me that he had just that day signed a contract to pay me for 4 paintings of yachts to go into the main club room of the Yachting Society. He was the president. And he didn't have anything else to say. What could he say? So, I really had a fun time as a national serviceman. And looking back on it all, right to this very day, to this very moment, life has been largely fun, with some pretty sad happenings to do with the war and that, and to cope with. But I've been very lucky in that. So from the national service, I went to my first job as an art teacher. And again, I've been very, very lucky. I have never, ever had to face an interviewing committee. For whatever reason, I've always been invited to take up a post. And the very first one was no different. It was the headmaster asking me to come over and have a chat. I took a folder of artwork over with me, but basically we spent 20 minutes talking about Japan and my experiences there. And it turned out that I was very similar in my background to the man who was running the art department. And Dr. Watson simply said, "Well, see you in September, and you'll be very welcome here." And so began a lovely work situation. The school was on the edge of the countryside, actually in Middlesex, but beautiful countryside room. The boys were all grammar school successes, and they had parents who were motivated as well, so you had no discipline problems. They wanted to learn, they were interested, and the years began to accumulate when I was a very happy teacher. And then, as so happens, when you think you've got it made, I remember the sun was shining, the boys were just trooping out for the first rugby match. And I looked around at my fellow staff members and thought, what a great group of friends they were. And I did that very seriously because I'd just come out of the telephone box and there'd been a voice at the other end who went right back to my days in the military. And he was saying to me, Brian, we have a job for you in Kuala Lumpur as head of the art department. You will be teaching military children, but 20 other different nationalities as well, because all the consulates and embassies send their children, if they can't send them to public schools in England and America and other places, they send them to where you will be working. And it's a lovely opportunity. You've got the job. The only drawback is you have to tell me in 24 hours, yes or no. So it took me 2 hours. 2 hours to decide that this was a wonderful opportunity. And that really began my life as an artist, because I went to Malaysia, where everything to do with creativity, art, music, and that was suddenly fresh and wonderful, because they climbed out of their agricultural background situation. And Kuala Lumpur was absolutely buzzing with people wanting to make music, to paint pictures, to do opera. They'd suddenly discovered culture. And I arrived smack in the middle of that. And they seized upon me as one of the few sources of what you might call Western painting ability. And in no time at all, I had a big exhibition which was supported by the British Council, funded by the Arts Council of Malaysia. And they pulled out all the stops to make it a really special occasion. The current representative of the Queen was a Viscount Head, and Viscount Head declared the exhibition open. And I can remember he gave a very good speech, and I was quite pleased with what he said. And then I noticed that he and all the other embassy officials and consulate officials adjourned within the gallery and within the pictures to talk about, obviously, politics and the situation that was developing with China. They weren't looking at the paintings anyway. But anyway, he'd done his job. And in fact, I felt the necessity to give his wife one of the paintings. And Spies, only 3 years ago, which is ages, dozens and dozens, 20, 30 years after all this happened, 40 years, they said, do you know, the painting you gave Lady Head is still on the wall in this big house that they had. So my belief that they'd thrown it away was probably settled. That exhibition really opened up the year for me. I became involved in all manner of things to do with art. I also returned to the business of designing for the stage. We did one show which was a wonderful excuse to paint more pictures. It was a Bernard Shaw play where the last act ended up in an art gallery. And so I put all my pictures in. And in fact, I sold all of them. And I was delighted that that happened, because you didn't get paid very much money. And teaching salaries were never great. So whenever I could sell paintings, I did. And that, I think, really finished up what you might call the sorting oneself out in terms of what one was going to do. I was going to teach to keep the bread coming in. I was going to paint because I loved doing it. I was going to design for the theatre because that was a special part of my life, and I was going to live abroad because I found boring England too much to cope with. And yet again, and by this time, most significantly, I had fallen in love with Maureen, and we got married. We didn't really have a marriage, we had a staff meeting, because there weren't any relatives in sight. We were 6,000 miles away from our parents, and that too had its enormous benefits because everyone sent us checks as wedding presents, and we were able to go off to Japan for our honeymoon, and with my wife in tow, and lots of money to spend on wedding presents, I went back to Hiroshima and into Yomushka and said, I'd like coffee and cake for my wife and myself, and I'd like the second two movements of Dvorak's New World Symphony. And I felt so great doing that. I mean, it's silly really, but I got quite carried away by it. Hiroshima had its very serious side, of course, because I was there early enough to really experience the effect of the atom bomb. The most awful thing I ever saw in that year in Japan and on that particular honeymoon was the shadow of a human being on the wall of the bridge. The human being had been dematerialized by the bomb's power. The human being had just vanished. And there was the shadow, beautifully sharp on the wall. And they took the bridge. By the time I came back from had the honeymoon and everything, we went in to see the completed museum that was not in honor, it's not the right word. It was a significant display to do with the terrible effect of the atom bomb. And there in the display was the bridge I'd looked at as a national serviceman. And one of the things that's been ongoing ever since, I had an argument only a few weeks ago with someone who said that dropping the atom bomb on Japan was totally wrong, to kill 1 million people. And I had to explain to her that my knowledge of the Japanese and what I knew to be true in the time I'd lived and worked there with them, I know that they would have fought for Japan foot by foot, yard by yard. The number of people who would have died would have been millions, absolutely millions. So I have no doubt that however awful the atom bomb was, it needed to be dropped to stop the Japanese, and I stick to that opinion to this very day. So Malaysia had done its magic. Japan had been wonderful. We continue to visit Japan, but I needed another job, and the job in Hong Kong cropped up, and so I applied for it, and I got invited up to this house, this impressive mansion that the military uses for carrying out activities to do with the educational system. And I was told to report to room 25. So walked into room 25, and there was this official. He had his feet up on the table, actually. He was sitting back, totally relaxed. And he said, well, of course you got the job, Brian. And I said, I have. He said, oh, yes. But I want to talk you out of it. I used to be an art teacher, he said, and I joined the military as an officer. And I can tell you, it's a great life. And you get well paid, and you travel all over the place. So much better than you going off to Hong Kong. I said, no, thank you. I enjoy teaching. I enjoy the chance to paint and design. I'll very happily go to Hong Kong. I know it's not going to be as exotic as Japan or Malaysia, but my wife and I are totally devoted to the idea of Hong Kong. So if I've got the job, please, may I take it? Oh, well, he said, all right. And we went off to Japan, to Hong Kong, sorry. And the first reactions to Hong Kong were not good, not least because of the belief that old chestnut cultural desert, which you probably don't hear very much of. But in my early days in Hong Kong, it was on everyone's lips who was interested in anything to do with art. There were very few artists, there were very few exhibitions, there were very few recitals, there was the occasional visit of an orchestra. I went to the British Council and I said, I've just had a very successful exhibition sponsored by the Arts Council and the British Council in Kuala Lumpur. Do you do anything like that here in Hong Kong? Oh, no, they said, no. We run a good library, which they have incidentally closed in the last few years. And we did have an exhibition of photographs of Henry Moore's work. I thought, photographs of Henry Moore's work? And not really anything else. We're too busy with teaching and all that stuff. Sorry. So I left the British Council and I thought, well, this is going to be a rather lonely existence. And certainly for the first few years, I felt very much that there were only a few artists who were exhibiting or doing anything in Hong Kong. Young Chinese artists really went off to places like Manila to have exhibitions. There was a lot of talent. I could see marvelous work being done by all sorts of young Chinese artists, but they had to worry about working. They had to bring the bread in. So they were part-time artists, and they certainly couldn't afford the cost of a gallery. The City Hall had a curious system where if you wanted an exhibition, you put your name in the hat, and then the man running the gallery, Ray Bletus, would pull out the numbers, and some people got 1 day's exhibition, some people got 3 days exhibition. And on the only occasion that I ever took part in that, I got a week's exhibition. And I was very grateful for that. But what really set me up in Hong Kong was that early on, the local amateur opera society, the Hong Kong Singers, were putting on a play, and they had a real disaster facing them. Their stage designer, who was supposed to do the Yeoman of the Guard, had been packed off home for some reason. He just wasn't around. He wasn't able to do anything. And they were in the middle of rehearsals, and they were worried sick. And one of them was part of the school that I'd gone to, St. George's. And he came up to me in the first couple of weeks and said, do you think you'd be able to design our sets for us? I gather you're quite keen on stage design. And I said, not really. I said, I've got to get used to Hong Kong. I've got to set up my art gallery. My conditions were pretty awful. I had an art room, not art gallery, art setup, classroom. It was one of these army tin shacks, and the heat beat down on. It was actually cooler to go outside than to go into the art room, because you couldn't put the fans on, because that made the children's paper just sort of blow about all over the place, and the paint was powder paint. You can imagine what it did to that. So I was struggling with that, but he was very persistent as a member of the Hong Kong Singers, and so I went ahead and did it. And I thought, if I'm going to do it, this is my first show in Hong Kong, I'm going to give them the lot. So I did a front rock of the Tower of London. I covered the City Hall stage with cobblestone, and I had built a complete fortification for the actual acting. And the front drop, of course, was one of these gauzes, where if you played the light onto the front, there was the Tower of London. If you brought the light up behind and lowered it at front, so the setting and the cast absolutely still and waiting for the music. And that's how we played it. And the gauze went up, and then we were on. And the show was happily a great success, because whatever else the set was, the singing was really excellent, and the acting. And for an amateur group, they did jolly well. And a lot of semi-amateurs in amongst the cast. But where I benefited, and again, it's this business of being happy and lucky, all rolled into one over the years. I mean, I'm so lucky to meet Roy. I'm so lucky to get this job, and so on and so forth. I feel lucky that this exhibition is happening now. And the luck in terms of the Yeomen of the Guard, that on the opening night, there were 3 people sitting in the audience. One was Maggie Christensen, who was the public relations officer of the Mandarin. And she was looking for an artist to be around, doing other things, but available if she suddenly wanted decor for an Indian curry festival. Or, as turned out, one of the big projects I did was a celebration of the Mandarin's 3rd birthday. Sitting not very far away from her was a gentleman called David Creedy, who was Mr. British Airways. He wanted an artist to be available to paint more or less anything the artist wanted, but which had some loose connection with travel. And that was to be given to various travel agents as a thank you if they pushed a lot of work in the direction of British Airways. All sounds a bit commercial. And finally, there was the man who was running the publicity side of Cathay Pacific. And he wanted a traveling artist to represent Cathay Pacific. He would fly the whole family, by which time we had three small children. He would fly the whole family to any country on the list that Cathay Pacific covered. And when you look at the agreement, you see about 10 different countries. You draw a circle around Hong Kong, and it covered everything from Bali to my beloved Japan. I think the only country we never visited was South Korea. But we went everywhere else for free. I would do any painting I wanted to do. I wasn't being told, go and paint the Taj Mahal. I was simply asked to bring a painting back that could go into the offices of Cathay Pacific. And so in the space of one performance, I got 3 wonderful contracts. And I was Cathay Pacific's artist sufficiently strongly that they printed a card, still got one. It says, Brian Tilbrook, Cathay's travelling artist. And there came a point with the children, who were all very young, when they said to us, oh, please, do you think we could have Christmas in Hong Kong? Because every holiday we're all going off to any and every one of these places and having a wonderful time, coming back with paintings. And that too became part of the Hong Kong story. And you know, I was looking at one of the old catalogues, and each year, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, the commissions would just come in on a regular basis. People would want a piece of artwork for their home, or they'd want it for their office. I was kept busy full-time teaching, full-time parent, 3 children, and full-time theatre designer and painter. And of course, every so often I would leap at the chance of having, say, the newly created art centre for a 10-day exhibition. And I never went back to the City Hall. 1 day and 2 days and 3 days is not enough. And here I am talking to you, looking at the prospect of an 11-week exhibition. And I just think I'm extremely lucky. The artwork itself has undergone a lot of changes, largely induced by the government commissioning me to paint the 50 pictures for the Heritage of Hong Kong book. It's a lovely idea. They wanted to encourage people to take their heritage seriously. They gave me a list of 365 different temples, ancestral halls, Hong Kong University, Clock Tower in Kowloon, sometimes rock formations, which were useless as paintings. There were 365. And the brief was to pick 50 that I wanted to paint. Not 50 they wanted me to paint. I chose. And if there's one thing in what can sometimes sound like a commercial life in Hong Kong, painting so many pictures that I can pay for, it was that I never did a painting for anyone which they told me, this is what I want. Every time I selected it. And in that sense, I felt I kept my being an artist as opposed to being a worker. Silly to even worry about it because I enjoyed it all. But I finally picked on the 50 paintings. And I said, and how long is this book going to take? A year, I said. We've allocated a year to producing it. And we're going to get money pumped into the various temples and ancestral halls and repairs, improving information boards, and most of all, through the government, every one of them is safe and cannot be knocked down. And that was marvelous. I thought that was great. So I said, you mean I have to paint a picture every week to produce 50 pictures in 1 year, 2 weeks off? Well, yes, they said. You don't have to do a painting every week, but you might have to do 2 paintings in 1 week to make up for that. We were all very friendly about it, but it was quite an assignment. And I did it. Sometimes I did it with a sense of an automatic artist. Sometimes I did it with a real excitement about a particular place. And what I felt ebbing away was any real interest in realistic painting anymore thereafter. And slowly but surely, the semi-abstract work, which was already beginning to creep in as an experiment. I was always messing about with effects and concepts and things, even though a lot of the work was realistic. But that project for the government really finished me off. They picked 12 of the paintings for the official calendar that year, which was nice for me. I had my paintings reproduced. And they treated the work very seriously. I mean, I had to approve, the final camera work. There was a very good article to go with each painting, which was written by Peter Moss, one of the government information officials. Trying to think of a very, very famous writer was used to introduce the book. The name is actually in the book, but I can't remember it. Old age, you see. I keep discovering that I've forgotten somebody's name. But it was a success as a book, in that at the end of the book, there were little maps on how to get to these different places. And all of a sudden, people were realizing that if they went just a couple of miles beyond their village or town, there was a lovely old temple which was waiting to be discovered. And the maps which the government gave me took us to all sorts of parts of the new territories we wouldn't ordinarily have gone to. So it was benefit all around. But in terms of myself as a painter, I slowly but surely began to pull away. And as you had a display or an exhibition, so there were fewer realistic pictures and more semi-abstract pictures. And of course we have an exhibition now where what really matters in terms of recent times, recent years, is abstract, semi-abstract. And what refers to the past is where we will see some realistic paintings. And here we are. And I think I'm incredibly lucky again, because out of the blue, you came and asked me if I'd like an exhibition. And I think I'm very lucky. Thank you very much.